ending racial profiling, ending police brutality. And so that kind of got me started officially when it comes to social justice. And an opportunity came a couple years later to help work with Drug Policy Alliance in the state of Colorado. And due to my work with Colorado Progressive Coalition, I kind of put myself on the map a little bit. And the work that Drug Policy Alliance does is to establish drug policy based on science, compassion, human rights, and health. So basically, no stigma, no hype. You know, like Flavor Flav said, don't believe the hype. You know, we base everything we do on science, and we look to promote alternatives to the drug war. So my racial justice paths and working to end the over-incarceration of people of color naturally fit into the work that the Drug Policy Alliance was doing regarding the drug war. You know, if you all don't know, African Americans are more likely to be stopped, searched, arrested, convicted, and sentenced at higher rates than all other people when it comes to drug policy. We don't use drugs, we don't sell drugs at higher rates than white people. I know some of y'all may not believe that. I didn't believe that 15 years ago, but that's the truth. And so I see the drug war as the one area where a lot of the foul stuff that took place with slavery, with Jim Crow, still exists. And so I was happy to jump into that fight with Drug Policy Alliance. They decided to go to Colorado. We got some partners there. And as you all may know, in 2012, in November, Colorado became the first state to legalize marijuana for adult use. I worked on that issue. If you want to clap, go ahead. And if you want to boo, go ahead and boo. We can talk about it. But my job on that campaign was to put the issue of marijuana legalization under the issue of broader criminal justice reform, make it a racial justice issue, because that's what it was. You know, and in my community, African Americans are 3 times more likely to be arrested for marijuana. And so, you know, I thank Drug Policy Alliance, I thank Colorado Progressive Coalition, I thank my parents, I thank God, and happy to be here with y'all today.
Outstanding. With that, a little statistic from the sentencing group, the war on drugs, in which 2/3 of all persons in prison are from drug offenses or people of color, which validates exactly what you're saying. With that, we'll segue over to Chief Dixon. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Can you hear me clearly?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. First of all, I want to, applaud NAN for being such a bold organization to spearhead this whole project. This is one of those topics that people are apprehensive about bringing to the forefront. So I want to take a moment just to applaud them. And I know people sit back and they say, "Wow, here's a police chief on this side, speaking these issues." So let me be real clear on how this looks from my perspective. First of all, I represent NOBLE, which is a national organization of black law enforcement. And that is, we take a different stand on a lot of issues that my counterparts don't take. We tend to be the conscience of law enforcement. We realize that law enforcement is needed, but it's a way to do any and everything. And that's where we take the approach. We want to bring the approach that where we don't have disparity of anything. If it's going to be done, let's dismiss it fairly across the board. And I think we within ourselves, when we see and hear that, we can accept that a lot better. Go ahead and clap, like my man said. So I wanted to get that out because, being in uniform, representing law enforcement, especially in our community, sometimes it's such a negative. But I will tell you, NOBLE has 59 chapters. We have 6 regions, and we're across the country. We're actually an international organization at this point, and we reach out to each one of our chapters. We focus on things like AIDS prevention. We focus on things like driving while black. That's a big, NOBLE was one of the first organizations that forefronted that issue. So, again, we saw the problem, we recognized the problem, and we put some solutions in the way of that problem to make sure that that was a thing that didn't continue to happen. And we're still working toward that. Our job is nowhere near done because we have constant issues. Here's another issue. We're talking about filters in cigarettes. you know, there's no doubt in any of our minds that, you know, people of color are the ones who more than likely will smoke cigarettes who have filters. I mean, we all know that. We like cools, we like, you know, things of that nature when we do smoke. And I want to be clear, we all realize that, you know, smoking is an issue. We're not addressing that, and, you know, that's a medical issue. We all know the results of those type of things. But, you know, we want to make sure we take a firm stand on the fact that if we criminalize filters and cigarettes, then we can focus on a majority of people of color. And we know that. And Noble's taking that stand in order to make sure that we bring that to the forefront and we show that we need to rethink on that whole issue and rethink on how we approach that issue and not make it a criminal matter. You know, look at it from a health matter, look at it from an educational matter, look at it from a whole lot of other different perspectives. We don't need to lock up more folks of color, especially for some nonviolent, ridiculous offense. And I'm probably going to be tweeted and Googled and everything else on that. But, you know, but we need to take that kind of approach. We need to make sure that we take a strong stand. And we feel, as an organization, that we're definitely some of the people, because that's going to affect what we do on our job. It's just going to make us top resources, top everything else, to focus on a bunch of kids, you know, or young, consenting adults with filters and cigarettes. So, you know, I wanted to give that perspective from Noble so you can see why I'm here from a law enforcement perspective too. So thank you all, and look forward to a very happy discussion.
Major, you're up next, sir.
Okay, hold on to your seats, folks. All right, so my name is Neil Franklin. I'm a retired major from the Maryland State Police, and I've commanded Baltimore's training division after that and went on to another agency for 6 more years. And most of my work was either in drug enforcement or criminal investigation. I worked undercover in the Baltimore area. I commanded multi-jurisdictional drug task forces throughout my career. I had 9 at one time for the entire eastern part of the state of Maryland. And I put a lot of people in prison. Most of them look like us. Most of those criminal violations were for nonviolent drug offenses. Many for simple marijuana possession. Many for people who were addicted to drugs, suffering from a health issue. And when you really look at it, they weren't criminals. Even the ones who were dealing to manage. You have to break into your cars or homes. Okay, so what I'm saying here is, for 4 decades now, we have been trying to solve a health issue with a criminal justice solution. And as we see now, it doesn't work. But you haven't heard anything yet. So, the organization Law Enforcement Against Prohibition that I represent is an international organization of criminal justice professionals, police officers, judges, criminal prosecutors, prison wardens, DEA agents, FBI agents, most of which are retired, because this is a very difficult subject for someone in law enforcement to talk about, and to take the approach that we take, which is to legalize all drugs.
About time.
To legalize all drugs. And that's why I told you to hold on to your seats, but hear me out. Here comes my disclaimer. That does not mean that we condone the use of.
Correct.
It does not mean that we advocate for the use of drugs.
Correct.
We advocate for abstinence, to stay away from the ones that are currently illegal, stay away from alcohol, to stay away from tobacco, and the ones that are legal. Just don't mess with mine, caffeine, because I love a good Starbucks coffee. Here's what I'm saying, and here's what we say. These policies of drug prohibition, they haven't done what they were intended to do.
How about
They
that?
haven't reduced crime.
Nope.
They haven't reduced addiction.
Nope.
Okay, they haven't reduced disease,
Nope.
and don't look for them to do such.
How about that?
because we have been down this road once before with alcohol prohibition in the 1920s. Now, some of you in this room might remember that. 13 years alcohol prohibition lasted. Why only 13 years? And I'm not just talking about a law change. We're talking about a constitutional amendment that they ended, repealed after only 13 years. Why? Because, you know what, we had running gun battles, we had drive-by shootings, we had corruption. And you know what? We still had alcoholism at very high rates. What we did, we drove that business underground, turned it over to organized crime, who got wealthy, making a lot of money, and created a lot of havoc in our community. Just like today, they were also responsible for recruiting our young people into the business of bootlegging. But back then, most of the people who were in the bootlegging business and recruited into the bootlegging business didn't look like the people in this room. After 13 years of that nonsense, they ended it. Repeated that mistake again. And as we grow. Our policies of drug prohibition, again, that we are attempting to use, but see, that's not the real story. To solve a health issue. It goes much deeper than that. It's about social control. Let's get real. Drug policy in this country has always been about controlling Harrison Narcotics Act, okay, with prohibiting opium and controlling the Chinese population first, moving forward through time, marijuana in the southwest part of the country, Mexicans, cocaine with blacks. Read the newspaper stories, folks. Do your research and learn what this is really all about. But I'm coming to this here now from a place, and unfortunately it was seeing too much violence within my circles that caused me to step back from my law enforcement career and take a look at this. The violence within our communities. But then I began to become more and more educated. I started doing the research. I joined up with the organization that I now am the director of, and I learned about racial profiling. Okay, I learned about mass incarceration. I learned about the health issues surrounded to these policies, dealing with these policies of prohibition, and how the overdose death rates continue to climb as long as we have these policies of prohibition and not one centered in health and education. There's a lot I have to say about this topic, but I just wanted to give you a brief introduction as to where I come from and where I am now advocating for a drastic change in our drug policies across this country so that we can get down to the business of healing families in the black community and bringing people home from prison.
Thank you, Major. Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Barrister. Ladies and gentlemen, as you can see, we have professionals that are in the field, that are doing something about what they have found to be a problem. I think it's very important to note, especially from the law enforcement standpoint, I just want to frame the issue because we may be familiar with some of the issues, but not all the issues, and then we will, go into questions in about 15 minutes, which will give us about 45 minutes of question and answer, which I think is pretty generous for audience participation. But that's the panel and I both agree that would be the appropriate way to move forward, because we appreciate the audience that we have here, because you're also members of this panel too, because you bring perspective, experience, and firsthand knowledge of many of these issues that we're talking about. Talking about the prohibition, as you heard the Major speak of, and also the Chief speak of, the prohibition of the sale of menthol. Now, let me just say this right now. I think it's very important to note that the FDA in 2009, the U.S. Congress passed the authority to allow the FDA to take a study or look at the question of the sale of menthol cigarettes in the United States. That is an open question right now. They're in an open comment phase right now. They want to head towards the piece of making it illegal to sell or possess a menthol cigarette here in the United States. Now, where does that bring into question? Well, people ask the question, say, well, goodness gracious, why would one want to go that far as it relates to criminalizing the sale of a cigarette that's majority used by people of color? I can tell you many of the law enforcement organizations, the Fraternal Order of Police, Noble, and other organizations like it have come out against such practice because of the creation of a black market within, or an organized crime market within communities that are challenged communities of color, that would create street sales of menthol cigarettes, would then create law enforcement activity on top of those young people out there moving that kind of product. Now, I can tell you, I have a 16-year-old son, and he doesn't smoke cigarettes. But I'm not going to wait until he's around some friends who say, hey, because it's illegal or something like that, oh, well, let's try this menthol cigarette. He ends up in some sort of reverse thing, and I sat here and watched this whole thing happen. Now, I've been a member of the legislature, and I've put handcuffs on people before. I've arrested individuals that have been trafficking drugs. I've arrested individuals that had possession of drugs. I've arrested individuals that have been driving under the influence of drugs as a Florida State Trooper, and eventually I became a captain. I will tell you this, ladies and gentlemen, people make youthful indiscretions.
That's right.
We have presidents that have admitted to youthful indiscretions. I think it's very important we look at the criminalization, which is also a topic of this panel, of our young people making these decisions. It's not like when I came up. It'd be, oh, if you got arrested for something and you're a juvie, hell, forget about it. No, they don't forget about it.
No.
It's based on your credit. It's based on the right to vote. It's based on your employability. It's based on your acceptance to higher education. All of those things are alive and well. And I think that's the reason why the president is moving in the direction that he's moved into focusing on African American males and people of color and some of the challenges that they have faced historically. When you have a prison system where you see an over-representation of people of color and those that are financially challenged, there's a question that should be brought to bear. So when we look at those, we're looking at a situation when it comes down to the question of marijuana in this country. Now, we have some states, my state, moving on the Constitution to allow medical marijuana. You have other states that have legalized marijuana. So that's a question between the federal and the state law enforcement agencies and laws as it relates to the incarceration of those individuals.
Competing against one another. They can't take their business in the court like normal businesses do, so they take up guns and they solve issues on the street. You want to reduce gun violence in our communities? You want to reduce gun violence across this country? You can begin right there with ending drug prohibition. So alcohol is one of those things. What happened when they ended alcohol prohibition? Yeah, the crime went down, the street shootings went down, the corruption, went down. It didn't completely go away, no, but it went down to what we consider manageable level. And yeah, we still ended up with our health problem, but you know what? We ended up with alcohol for those who decide to consume. At least knew what they were consuming. Okay, you know how potent it is. You know what percentage of alcohol is in it. You know it's not laced with something that will do more harm to you. So the quality of the product also improves. Right. Even though these things we're talking about are potentially harmful, alcohol, tobacco kill more people than anything else. Marijuana, 0. Anyway, so alcohol, I think you get that with alcohol. But let's talk about gambling real quick. Okay, now I know it's probably like me, I'm church folk, right? I don't really agree with gambling. I don't give the casinos my money. I work too hard for my money. But gambling is a problem. We have huge addiction problems and issues and concerns with gambling. It causes all types of issues in our communities and in our households. My father used to run numbers. Okay, that was his part-time job. He made ends meet so mom could stay at home, right? I used to go with him on Sundays when he would make his rounds when I was about 12, 11 years old. I just thought he had a lot of friends. He was paying out, he was picking up, right? And then in July, July 29th, 1976, the state of Maryland put my father out of business, along with little Willie Adams in Baltimore, who was running that business in our community. Okay, that was the first three-digit number for the Maryland Lotto, 408. And it has continued ever since. Now we got the Mega Lotto and Power this, Powerball this, and that, and the other, and casinos are popping up everywhere. Yeah, gambling is potentially dangerous, but when you dump the criminal aspect on top of it and drive it underground, it becomes a violent, dirtier business, and it creates more problems within our communities than it does good. See, what we're talking about here, whether we're talking about drugs, whether we're talking about gambling, we're talking about two separate issues. We're talking about health issues on one side, okay, the use part, mental health, physical health, and then on the other side of this equation, we have the policy of prohibition, which is the criminalization piece of it. We don't need both. We don't need both. We're always going to have the health side. Let's get rid of this side, which causes crimes, violence, disease, so many other issues within our communities, mass incarceration, and let's focus on health, doctors, community, families, church. That's how you reduce use of anything that is potentially harmful to you. Just look at tobacco, what we've done, even though it's still a problem, what we've done over the past couple of decades, we've reduced use by almost 40%. We're sending no one to prison. We're not having shootouts in our streets. Through education, through health, through social pressure, social influence, because I don't smell anybody smoking cigarettes today. I haven't smelled one person, the smoke from one person smoking cigarettes, actually for probably about a week. Why? Because you can't smoke in here, and when it's 10 degrees outside like it was this winter, -10 for some of you, you know what? You want the light up, you had to go outside. That's how you reduce use, social influence.
Okay. Attorney Wade, you've worked with a number of policies in your time working with the Institute. I think that it's, when you look at the policies, look at the criminal justice system, you look at youthful indiscretions, in your work, how do you see the prevention mode kicking in as it relates to what you and your organization is working towards?
Well, you know, it's difficult to establish a public health and a prevention and an education approach if all of the resources are spent on punishment and looking to put people into a box. So, you know, in order to establish a true public health approach, you need funding, and you know that's something that's taking place in Colorado right now with marijuana legalization. You know, we're expecting to save as well as bring in close to $100 million just from the first year. And the majority of that money will be put into prevention and treatment efforts that focus on youth. You know, it's silly for us to think that the same system that punishes can also somehow rehabilitate. And that is something, and that's the line that we have to draw, and that's what we have to realize, you know, in order for us to really establish true prevention efforts, true public health efforts, we need to look to decriminalize, we need to look to limit the amount of money that is spent on the criminal justice system and put more of that money into the public health sector, put more of that money into the prevention and treatment sector. Yeah, to me it's all about the reallocation of resources ultimately. You know, they say the buck stops here, and when it comes to true prevention efforts, you know, that's true. I'm not talking about, you know, police coming in talking about if you do marijuana, you're gonna go crazy in schools. I'm talking about the public health community actually breaking down to children. These are the potential harms associated with marijuana. So if you do decide to use marijuana, this is what you should know, and this is what you should look out for. So we need to fund reality-based education, not education based on fear, education based on ignorance, really, that simply says, say no without telling why.
Very good. Very good, Chief. And I think that's a very important segue to the Chief, because I think it's very important to note that when we start looking at these policies, need to be by an unelected body or an elected body, and a new stream of what we call in the legislative world revenue. How will that revenue be directed? The major talk about the legalization of gambling. In the state of Florida, the Florida lottery was sold on pre-K education. But what happened was the bait and switch during that time. Yeah, it was sold on that, but it ended up instead of enhancing education, they just replaced the lottery dollars and took those existing dollars and put them into other places for tax cuts for corporations, which we have to watch these things as they move along. And I'm so glad to hear Attorney Wade speak of his efforts and his organization's efforts in making sure if something is going to be legalized and there will be revenue generated from that, either be at the state, county, or local level, that those dollars are directed in the prevention of individuals becoming users in the first place. So that was very, 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 very powerful. Chief, as you know, you have a city that has that deal with what's happening. You have some zip codes that folks don't necessarily look to, move into and put their kids in school in those zip codes. I can tell you firsthand, Chief, I've received a call, from a correctional institute. Did you accept the call from a family member? Oh, I'm by myself? Oh, okay, I just want to make sure y'all got quiet. I'm just going to say I got a cousin that's in prison right now that need to be there. But, I've received those calls. When we start looking at this question of, when we talk about up and smoke, the criminalization, on the prevention side, we have some laws that have already been passed, sir. We have some laws or regulation that will be placed to criminalize the use of menthol and could criminalize other areas as we start looking at the evaluation of all of these things. What effects it has had in your city, sir? Or I won't even, let's say your city, you as the leader of the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives, what's your membership sharing with you as it relates to some of these laws and some of the efforts that Noble is taking on? Because, sir, you're really here on behalf of Noble and to bring perspective, sir.
All right, well, I don't mind bringing even what I do perspective, because I'll tell you, first and foremost, it's a resource issue. You're talking about adding a whole new segment to law enforcement. You're talking about kids from the age of 11 on up. You're talking about consenting adults. Now they can't get caught with a filtered cigarette. I mean, it almost sounds ridiculous, when you hear it. A filter on the cigarette, I can put you in jail. I mean, take a minute to think about that. A filter on the cigarette, something that, you see people throw on the ground, something that is so common, and we're getting ready to make this against the law, where you can be arrested for it.
See, they're talking about the menthol piece. Go ahead.
Right.
Yeah, not the filter.
Okay, the menthol piece. And the biggest thing on here is, it's not probably a person in this room, and I'm not asking people to raise their hands or anything, that hadn't experimented with a cigarette. I mean, coming up, that was the thing, you smoke a cigarette, I mean, whether you're a smoker now or not, you either know somebody or you put a cigarette in your mouth one time or another. And you could be put in jail for that. We talked about youthful indiscretions. We talked about things that we did when we were kids. I'm a chief of police now, head of a national organization. My goodness, if I had been assessed for what I did when I was 12, 13, 14 years old. I mean, I'm being self. I grew up in North Philly. And let me tell you, I did some things that there is no way that if I was held accountable to this day for those things, I would have been able to, arise to, being a chief of police or the head of a national organization. We as people have to take a look at this and take a very serious look at it and take action, toward these things, because if we don't take action, I'll tell you from law enforcement perspective, to get back around where I'm talking, we would expend all these resources chasing folks, for cigarettes. I mean, you know, and we got, you know, I wrote down a couple things. I tell you, we need to look at this from a prevention standpoint. We need to look at it from an educational standpoint. We need to look at it from a treatment standpoint. And we need to look at it from a best practice standpoint. Now, our best practices show clearly that if we make this illegal, what's going to happen next? You're going to have mafia and all other kind of folks coming with the gangs and everything to make sure that this still happens. We're not going to stop people from getting cigarettes. I mean, I was in the Marine Corps. Guess what? We used to bring cigarettes, and people from, you know, the different areas where I was overseas, they would come get cigarettes from us. You know, because they couldn't get them through the way they wanted to get them, so they come get them from us. So we're not going to stop people from getting cigarettes. What we're going to do is create a whole illegal, you know, group of folks that will increase on what they're doing to make sure that they get cigarettes. We're going to increase violence because guess what? He's going to do more than me, so guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to have an issue with him. You know, and I'm going to take over his territory. You know, we got to stop being feeders to criminal activity. You know, and that's what we'll do here. From a police perspective, we will increase crime. We will increase, you know, the revenue that's not going, you know, that's going for taxes now. We will do a whole lot of things to hurt the whole system rather than to help the system. You know, and again, I want to applaud you all for being here to listen to this stuff because you could have been somewhere else on Saturday. That's what my preacher usually said. You're here, you know, and you're here to listen to and hopefully make a change. Hopefully this is a panel of action. Hopefully this is the opportunity that we can go forward and look at how we can, you know, change these issues up front. You know, it's almost ridiculous to me. I can't even say what I really want to say. You know, I mean, what idiot thought of this? You know, I mean, that's how you feel. You know, to make a cigarette illegal to the point where I can arrest you, for having a cigarette. You know, we have to take a stand on this, and we have to make sure that this doesn't fall into play.
Chief, it's interesting. You said what idiots, and I may be one of them, but no, seriously. You know, when you look at it, and this frames the issue as we move into our question and answer. Many times, you have legislative bodies that move forward to prevent something from happening and to educate. Yeah. The commercials that you see on television, don't smoke this, don't smoke that, individuals that have been affected by the effects of cigarettes. My father died of complications of cancer because he smoked cigarettes from the age of 15 or whatever the case may be. That was his choice. Even though I have that background, I do believe that it's very important that we evaluate, and the Congress also believe, because when the 2009 law was passed, they left this question unanswered because of the disproportionate share of individuals of color that smoke menthol cigarettes. Now, the criminalization of it brings the question, are we going to open another statute or chapter to make individuals that we already know that's the supermajority of a population that smokes this brand of cigarettes or flavor of cigarettes or what have you, victim to that. Now, as a law enforcement agent, I can't tell you, even when I'm in the neighborhood store, I see individuals selling single cigarettes. Oh, I just want 2, I want 3. What happens if this passes that you can no longer buy a pack of whatever you want to buy, and the individuals out there selling singles? I can see now statistically law enforcement, I'm just going to tell you the way it is. I've been on both sides involved, legislative and law enforcement. You're out there, you have to generate arrests. People used to ask me all the time when I was a trooper, is there a quota for tickets? That answer would be no. In reality, yes. Okay, thank you. So when you look at what may very well happen, this is the question that was before the Congress. House and Senate. Not just proud Hispanic members of Congress, not just proud African Americans of Congress, not just proud women of Congress, not just proud individuals from tobacco states in Congress. The entire Congress decided to punt on this issue and give it to a non-elected body to make the decision. Now, that may be okay for someone's voting record. Say I didn't or I did. And I did not put a law on you that I knew from the beginning that will end up affecting you or a member of your family. I've allowed someone else to make that decision that's unelected, that's hearing from a pro and con community on this question, that may very well, I guarantee you at the FDA, the room doesn't look like this. No. On the comment phase. So that was one of the questions, and I want to thank Dan for assembling this panel and allowing us to have this discussion. So we're ready to have questions. Yes, sir. Please stand up to the mic. It must not be on. Can someone get this mic working? Because I want to make sure the people in the back can hear you, sir. No one can hear you. I think we have something going here. There we go.
The United States government has been protecting the borders of Japan since the 1940s and the borders of Korea, South Korea, since the end of the Korean War in 1953. Can anybody hazard a guess why, and those two countries don't have drugs coming in there, can anybody hazard a guess why the United States government, with the greatest military in world history, has not positioned military troops along the border to stop this stuff from coming in? And while you amplifying that, can you perhaps explain to the community what would happen to the crime problem, both drug-related and otherwise, if the military of the United States government were to lock down the borders? Would that result in a reduction of crime in your respective communities and perhaps nationwide?
Chief, he's looking at you.
Looking at you.
Yeah. It's very difficult to answer the first part of that because, I concur. We have the greatest government and the greatest military, known to man, without any question. Now, why we don't have them strategically in place is probably we need, to sit down and they need to have some, somebody mentioned the room don't look like us when they having these conversations. We need to be in that room having part of that because it's very difficult for people to understand the needs and the real way of doing it. I call it the boots on the ground. Sometimes these folks are so high up in the clouds, they forget what happened with the boots on the ground. And so therefore they don't do the things and put the policy in place and create the strategic approaches that you need to have the boots on the ground. The second part, yes, if we could stop all of the things and not just the drugs, all of the other illicit things that come into the country, yes, we would reduce crime. I mean, those figures. We stop all that foolishness from coming in, guns, drugs, paraphernalia of all kinds, we would reduce crime tremendously.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We got a nice line.
Just be really quick.
Real quick.
Just be really quick.
Mine is quick.
No, he wants to answer quick.
1 second, real quick. I think this is very important because what you're talking about, sir, is commerce. Right now, we only have the capabilities of searching less than 5% of the cargo that comes into this country. If we search close to 10% of the cargo coming into this country, we shut down commerce, we go into another financial depression in this country. Basically, we've got to have open and free borders of trade if we want this country to prosper. There's not a drug-free country on this planet, despite what you know. I just want you to know that. Not a drug-free country on this planet. Even in Saudi Arabia, where they cut off the heads of people who transport drugs and who sell drugs. You know what? Every week they still cut off heads. Okay, so it doesn't, and plus I don't think I want to live in a country like Saudi Arabia. This is a free society here in this country, and we have to keep it free if we want to maintain our freedom. So at the end of the day, I mean, we can't even keep drugs out of our secure prisons because it's too lucrative, generates too much money. So.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
My name is Rosa Caroline Lewis, and I'm hail from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I'm better known as Mama Rosa. And all my life, I worked in prison, institutions, and schools. And at one time, I had a campaign to get rid of that Newport cigarettes that all of the prisoners had in there. But my superintendent called me in and said, do you want your children, do you want to keep your job? Says you leave that part alone. So now, if the Iranians can sell them cigarette by cigarette, and other people do that, now why do they want to do this to our young men? Predominantly, most all of the guys in prison and African Americans like to smoke those menthols because I guess they got a hook on them. But what can I do as a citizen and a group of people that I want to get together to try to defray them from charging them now?
Well, that's an excellent question. Our learned attorney on deck would love to answer your question, ma'am. Go ahead.
You know, I don't know much about the menthol issue personally. My organization hasn't addressed it as much, but what I do know is we need to base this decision regarding menthol on science. Now, I'm not saying science is not without politics. Politics can get into science as well, but if it's shown that menthol somehow has a greater damage than actually a traditional cigarette, then we need to have that conversation, especially since so many African Americans like menthols. We need to have the conversation. But I agree, if you ban it outright, you're just going to create a black market. I learned that 1/3 of the cigarette industry is menthol. So you got, you know, the most important thing is to base your decision on science. If there's a problem, ideally the tobacco industry can self-correct itself, ideally in the utopian dream world. But, you know, I think that's possible. But, you know, I agree, trying to ban it outright, and especially bringing in the criminal justice system to deal with a menthol problem that's probably not as great as some try to make it, is the wrong step. But first and foremost, figure out what the problem is scientifically and then deal with it.
Okay, thank you. Sir?
Hi, Greg Burbridge, New Jersey, Avenue, New Jersey. To legalize drugs, to the victims, the incarceration rate for health reasons. Of course, in this room, we see great advantages to doing that. But to the people that, to the powers that be, to the drug lords, and to the gangs who make huge profits off of this, what incentives can we offer to them to stop doing what they're doing?
Go ahead,
Well,
Major.
I don't think you have to offer incentive. It's business for them. Unfortunately, it's a violent business for them. When there's no more money in it, you know, you either have to, like we did with alcohol, you either got to go legit, you either got to get your license, you got to abide by the laws and the regulations that we, the people, put in place, not their organizations, okay? You either do that or you're out of the business. You're not going to make any money. There was a New York Times piece, Washington Post article came out about a week ago where they interviewed some marijuana farmers in Mexico. And there was a quote from one of the farmers that says, "The Americans, I wish the Americans would stop this legalization." He's no longer making money, and now he's got to do something else. Okay, because we're growing weed here in the United States and regulating and controlling it and paying taxes on it and putting people to work, despite how you feel about marijuana use. We're doing the best that we can, knowing that people are going to use it. So they'll go do something else or they'll go legit.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Good afternoon. My name is Julie Waters. I'm a researcher at University of California, San Francisco, a tobacco researcher specifically, and I'm a member of the African American Tobacco Control Leadership Council, which is a group that actually came out in opposition of your stance on not banning menthol cigarettes. We were very present in the FDA proceedings. As African American researchers, we were there and actually giving public comment and voicing our concerns over whether or not it should be banned. And our stance is that it should be banned. 80% of African Americans smoke menthol cigarettes. We now have evidence that suggests that over 50% would quit smoking if menthol were banned. So we're presented with an opportunity to save thousands of black lives, by simply banning the substance, but you guys are in opposition of it just based on one study, I believe, in Canada that exists that says it may create a black market. So considering there's stronger evidence that supports banning would be more beneficial to our population, have you guys at all considered changing your stance in the past 4 years since all these publications have come out?
May I ask what that evidence is?
What evidence?
That menthol is more hazardous to?
There is no evidence. If you rewind to the original 2009 Master Settlement Agreement, I'm sorry, excuse me, not Master Settlement, Family Smoking Prevention Act, they went in and banned every flavoring. So cherry flavored cigarettes, which don't exist. Coconut flavored cigarettes, which do not exist. But when menthol came up, the tobacco industry came in and made sure that was carved out, and they were successful in doing that. So if they didn't have to sit there and justify menthol being worse or coconut being worse possibly, then why should they have to do it for menthol?
So the justification is that any flavoring adds more potential harms to cigarettes or to
It's not the
tobacco.
harm reduction factor argument. We're not talking about the harm. We're talking about the fact that they've targeted the African American community since the 60s and 70s. Cool Jazz Fest, when they're immersed in our community. So what we're talking about here is the fact that regardless of the research, it's present in our community, and this one act could save thousands of lives. We know that.
Because you think people will stop smoking tobacco if they can no longer smoke menthol?
We have research supporting that, yes. Over 50% of African Americans on paper have said that they would quit smoking menthol cigarettes if it were banned.
Okay, let me, one second, ladies and gentlemen,
I'm just asking the question.
Ladies and gentlemen, there's a reason why we're in this town hall setting, okay? It's about education, it's about getting it out. You either get involved in it or you stay out of it. So let's respect one another's views here, and let's, Chief, you had a comment.
Right, and let me make it clear from Noble's perspective. There is no issue about banning, and it's a health issue from the police perspective. What our issue is, we don't want to criminalize it. That's the issue. We have doctors, we have all of the researchers that can say, okay, what effects this have on your body. That's fine. We're just saying this is not a police problem, this is a health problem. And let's see if we can turn it over to where it's best fit. So I just wanted to, make that piece clear.
Okay. Well, let me just say this. So we have a number of people behind us, and I can only speak as I was, a member of Congress, and when this was passed, and I voted for S-CHIP, which was the legislation to not only tax tobacco products, to make sure the kids get health care and all of the other things that come out of it. The entire Congress, I guarantee you there were members of the tobacco community who did not want that piece of legislation to pass. But I voted for it candidly and had a press conference with then Speaker Nancy Pelosi in my district in Miami supporting it. I think the question goes back to what the Chief said. We do know that there's evidence when things are made criminalized, especially when you have a segment of the community that is more, how would you say, I'm trying to, susceptible to using such a product. Criminalizing it may very well set the deck. But as it relates to the health reasons of why someone should stop smoking, I believe you got a slam dunk up here on the panel of people who believe that we need to have not only the free tobacco commercials or things of that nature and the research that's going on. We're all in support of that. I think the criminalization of it. But I thank you for your question and your information that you share, because I think it is making our meeting here even more informative. Thank you. Yes, sir. Behind you.
Don't criminalize use, criminalize the corporations that continue to make the menthol cigarettes.
Whenever you have a commonly used substance that's made illegal, you're going to have unintended consequences. You're going to have problems.
Yes, sir.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. My name is Herman French from Bronx, Chapter 9, and I'm a firm believer in solutions. You hit the nail there on the head, because politicians create this mess due to the simple fact, no matter that 1914, the Harrison Act, which was initiated by a congressman out in New York State, which laid the groundwork for position for the mess being today. It also brought in the 16th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which created income tax on wages, which anti-child. Up to that time, the United States government got a third of its revenue from the taxation of alcohol. Since they need the money for taxation of alcohol, this brought in prohibition. Now, all this coalition goes right back into the education aspect, which was, that's part of the solution right there. Because number one, education in this country was created for the sole purpose of educating the residents, understand the law they were living under. The second thing they did made a crime to educate black folks. Understand that also the Supreme Court passed down a ruling a couple weeks ago that the law enforcement, police department, the only mandate is to enforce the law which you legislators created. So the solution to this has got to be multi-frontal. Change the law. Because as Bernie Martin said, how can you chase a crime when you only know what you're looking for? But once the statute's updated in place saying that what you're, we're only talking about once a year, behavior. A psychological dependency based on a physical need to get intoxication. And people want to get intoxicated, they want to fornicate, they want to gamble. And once you make it, boom, law. We criminalize everybody out here. Now, once again, you say legalize it.
You have a question, sir.
Question very simple. All the money in law enforcement. The hundreds of millions of dollars in law enforcement systems we have made everything legal. What we're going to do, we don't need no more police now, people police themselves. And the congressman, to change the legislation to correct all what's incorrect out here.
Well, we still, unfortunately, in this country, we still have some people, as my partner said, do want to see it behind bars, at least for a while, because we do have predators out here. You know, we do have people, and we got other crimes we can focus on. Okay, we got violent crimes, we got rapes, we got domestic violence, we got murders, we got. Well, I'm getting there. We got that. We got cyber crime that's booming today. We got identity theft that's not getting the appropriate attention. I mean, there's tons of work that we can do in law enforcement that we don't have the time to do today because we're busy with drug enforcement. Okay, just like here in New York with stop and frisk and all of that nonsense. So there's plenty for law enforcement to do. This, as far as the government funds, the grants and things that you're talking about, Tim, let's redirect that away from drug enforcement to these crimes that I'm talking about. So the cops will be able to do what they need to do, and that will better the relationships also between police and community. And then you'll see communities will blossom then.
Thank you, sir. Yes, ma'am.
I think that the criminal justice system has become more of a business. And my son got put into jail in Oregon, and basically he didn't have any justice served. We couldn't get his lawyer to respond to his family. He was really incarcerated for something small, and he wound up spending 5 years. And now that he's out, there's no help. There's no resources for him. There's like, I think that the people who are working through the justice system have a way of doubling the person back into the justice system. You know, yeah, and I feel as a mother, I've been banging my head against the wall. I can't even half the time get the parole officers to return my calls. I've called the head of the system out there, Charles Niels, and he doesn't ever answer his phone. I'm beside myself with, as what to do, because they put him on parole and they say that, he can't even apply to come home unless he's 6 months within the thing. He keeps on bottoming out of programs. I mean, what can be done to like really work on the criminal justice system to make it not a business and really help the people who are being shoved in it unjustly?
We have the answer for your question, and Attorney Wade is going to answer your question.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that this country still has a problem on profiting from bondage. And that's the case with the criminal justice system. We need to get off of that shit for the most part. We need to wean ourselves from that. And the prison industrial complex needs to shrink. And we need to take money from the prison industrial complex and, like I said earlier, put it into places where you have prevention and treatment efforts, where you can assess whether or not people actually are addicted. Drug courts take a bunch of people who aren't even addicted. Drug courts are still part of the criminal justice system. Drug courts expand the criminal justice system. We need to take money from the criminal justice system, similar to how Portugal did. They have a Ministry of Justice, they have a Ministry of Health. They took the issue of drug use and addiction completely from the Ministry of Justice and put it under the Ministry of Health. We need a full-scale reallocation of resources. We still need police. The police system may not, the police budget may not need to shrink, but they need to reallocate and reset their priorities. But the prison industrial complex needs some serious shrinking as a whole.
Thank you so very much. Thank you.
Congressman, if you could just let us know how many more questions you'd like to take.
We're going to take, I will go all the way to the lady who just got in the back of the line. Go ahead. You were getting in the back. The gentleman with the red hat will be our last questioner. And ma'am, I just want to thank you for coming up here because give her a round of applause. People work hard every day. We try to raise our children the way that we would like for them to be raised. And many times they're influenced by other individuals that they are called their peers. And then they find themselves in the criminal justice system. Yeah. And then you find yourself as a parent waiting and getting pat down to see your child and trying to figure out how can you correct the situation. Right. When many times, many of our young people, and I will attest as being a law enforcement, former law enforcement state trooper, statewide trooper in Florida, you write tickets to folks, the ticket's not a big thing. But if you don't pay attention, those tickets turn into what? Bench warrants? Bench warrants turn into bigger warrants. And then you can't get insurance. Now you're driving without insurance. There's another ticket. And then the next thing you know, you find yourself in a situation, you move from tickets to felonies based on what someone thought they were doing right. And I can tell you, policymakers in all of their wisdom and all of their willingness, you elect them, try to do things that will prevent crime in communities. But I can tell you, when we look at issues, there need to be drug policy, need to be menthol policy, and trying to make common sense legislation and policies is important because let me tell you something, you're just one step away from being this mother. Yeah. You could be an aunt, you could be a cousin, you could be an uncle. That's what this panel is about. Yes. It's about to bring awareness. Yes. So as you move back out to your affiliates throughout the country and other organizations that are represented here, you will be knowledgeable on the issue that we're talking about here today. Thank you. Yes, sir.
How you doing? My name is Brian. I'm a grad student at LIU. My question is that how do clinicians determine whether marijuana is used for health purposes or is it used for recreational purposes?
In Colorado, every state can, based on science, make rules and regulations as to what conditions qualify someone to be a medical marijuana patient. So it's whether it's nausea for AIDS and cancer. Very few states have PTSD as a qualifying condition. That's the big move coming up now. So in Colorado, you need to see a doctor, and your conditions need to fit under whatever categories the state regulations decide as a qualifying condition for medical marijuana. When it comes to recreational marijuana, you just need to be 21 and have an ID. And then you can go and purchase marijuana. So that's why it's regulated like alcohol. All you need is an ID to purchase recreational marijuana. And I hope I addressed the question.
Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, I just got a note because we started on time. We want to make sure the other panel started on time, and we're going to do a lightning round. I've been told I can take 2 to 3 more questions, but ask your quick question, and then we can probably get through everyone. If you ask your question, move to the side, we get an answer, and then we go ahead and move on. Ma'am, go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, my name is Velvet. I have a question for you. What is the statistics now in Colorado as far as your crime rate and people crossing and doing interstate commerce?
Crime.
Then I have a question for you. All right, get them all.
What happened to the lightning round?
Okay, when we're talking about creating jobs and securing the borders, why don't you use retired U.S. Postal Service personnel? They are your best inspectors on logistics, maybe not tactical, but as far as creating jobs and training others. And a question for you is that I'm going to cover with the menthol. If you look at all the ingredients that are in a filtered cigarette, I'm coming from the health field. I'm a registered nurse, so this is a lot of people. There is a reason I understand why you may want to deregulate on the menthol, but not to criminalize it, but to ban it would be a good thing, but then you need to ban all cigarettes because they're all made from tobacco.
All right, ma'am, in all due respect to everyone that's behind you, can you just answer real quick on the first question, and then we'll just,
Crime has not gone up since we legalized marijuana. It's actually gone down in certain instances in most communities. Traffic fatalities, there's that out there that shows that actual states that have medical marijuana and have brought marijuana above ground, traffic fatalities have gone down. We had the most peaceful St. Patrick's Day we ever had in the history of Colorado.
Okay, let me just, again, ladies and gentlemen, can I ask you, because I think the audience would like, they have closing comments. I tell you, the peaceful St. Patrick's Day is big. Let me just say this real quickly. I want to get to my man in the red hat, ask a question. They're going to have 3 minutes to make closing comments, maybe 2 minutes now. Just ask your question, and then they'll respond in their closing comments. Yes, ma'am. Just if you can do the light, remember, quickly.
Yeah, I'm a high school student in New York, and my question is, what would schools do to help influence the action on drug use? Because there's none. Basically, we talk about health and sex, but we don't talk about the use of marijuana, and especially my school. A lot of kids come to school high every day, and actually, two drug dealers just got caught for smoking in the bathroom. So, yes.
Okay. You have your question? Yes, sir.
This is to the chief there. Just wanted to know, how can you, as law enforcement, because I look up to you as law enforcement, can advertise to, everybody out there what's really going on there? Not, I know you have to be suppressed for what you say and stuff like that because you are in law enforcement. We all know this is a Black and Latino issue out there right now. How can you help us in what's going on in the drug war out here?
Chief, you'll get to respond in your closing. Yes, sir.
Good afternoon. My name is Felton Williamson. I'm from Brooklyn, Brownsville, New York. And one thing, I apologize. I live in Brooklyn, and none of us own chemical